Welcome to the Great Coaches Podcast.
To me, being perfect is not about that scoreboard out there.
This is a chance of a lifetime.
When you can understand the person, you can then work towards a common goal.
We are all on the same team.
Know your role and do it to the best of your ability.
Focus on the fundamentals. We've gone over time and time again.
Your defense has got to be better.
Leave no doubt tonight.
Great moments are born from great opportunity.
Hello, my name is Paul Barnett and welcome to the Great Coaches Podcast, where we believe that there is no algorithm for leadership, and so we interview great sports coaches from around the world to try and find ideas to help all of us be better leaders. This week, Professor Eric Knight and I begin our exploration of thriving teams with the great coach Jill McIntosh. Jill is a former Australian netball player and team coach. As a player, she was in the team that won the 1983 World Championship. And then she coached the national team that won the World Championship in 1995 and 1999, as well as gold medals at the 1998 and 2002 Commonwealth Games. She has also coached the national teams of Singapore, Northern Ireland and Jamaica, and is presently coach of the Cardiff Dragons in the UK Super League. In 2020, Jill was inducted into the Sport Australia Hall of Fame. Jill was fantastic to interview. She manages to balance warmth with that steely gaze that coaches with a long history of success somehow are able to create at a moment's notice. There were many highlights, but the three that stood out for me were how many coaches are good at knowing what they want, but fall down when it comes to creating the how of how their teams will get there. The way she uses her rule of excellence to guide all team activities, and the importance of getting in sync as a team, and the way that she goes about moulding teams to achieve this. And just before we go to the interview, today's podcast is brought to you by the Macquarie University Business School's MBA program. Designed to empower, challenge and transform, the Macquarie MBA gives you the business skills and knowledge you need to succeed in an evolving global economy. The program bridges the gap between theory and real-world application, bringing together world-leading professors, executives and industry partners to teach you how business can be used for good. I have just started working with the team at Macquarie on some projects and can attest to the quality of the people and material. To find out more, search for Macquarie University Business School's MBA. And now, please enjoy our interview with Jill McIntosh.
You're listening to the Great Coaches Podcast.
And of course, I'm joined for our interview today by Professor Eric Knight. Eric, how are you?
Fantastic, Paul. All the better for being with you.
Well, thank you for coming along to do this together. We're going to do a bit of a double team over the next, well, let's call a couple of months as we interview some very interesting leaders in sport and business and life about the idea of thriving teams.
Yeah, and look, I think it's a fantastic concept. It's rich, it's complex, and I think through some of these conversations, we're going to be able to tease it out with examples and see how it maps against people's real life experience.
And of course, welcome to today's guest, Jill McIntosh. Welcome to the Great Coaches Podcast.
Good afternoon. It's lovely to be with you.
Jill, something simple to get us going. Could you tell us where you are in the world and what you've been up to so far today?
Well, I'm back home in Canberra, in my house in Canberra. I've just got back from Cardiff, so the weather is at the two extremes, I guess. In Cardiff, Wales, I'm looking after the Cardiff Dragons in the netball UK Super League over there, so they're very much into pre-season at the moment. So I've come back for Christmas and New Year before I head off again mid-January for the whole season, which will encompass up until probably the end of June. So, yeah, back to the cold in January.
Well, look, we appreciate you carving out a little bit of time to talk to Eric and I about all things to do with leadership and teams. But Jill, I might just start actually by asking you about some of well, they are the giants of the game that you've worked with. There's Wilma Shakespeare, Gay Teed, there's Joyce Brown. I know that you know Norma Plummer, Jess Thilby. The list goes on and on and on. But I wanted to ask you, from this perspective of seeing these people up close, what is it you think the great coaches do differently that sets them apart?
Oh, when you look at these great coaches, and that's not only in netball, but in most sports, I think they have a dream or they have a plan. They know where they're going. They know where they want to be. They know what their team needs to do. And they're very good at getting to the end of that plan. And I think, some coaches you hear along the way and they just don't know where they're at. They don't know what they're doing. But the better ones, excuse me, they certainly do. And, it might be a 1, 2, 3, 4 year cycle as it is in netball. But, they're very good at dissecting that cycle. And by the end of it, hopefully reaching their goal and what they've had in mind. But they've got a good growth mindset. They've got a forward plan. They're a bit of dreamers, all of those sorts of things, but they can put it all together. And that's what it is about them, I think, sets them apart.
So, Jill, maybe just building on that, because I know your father was a AFL player, Hall of Fame AFL player, and so sport was a big part of your childhood. Can you just say something about what you took away from, your childhood and your time with your dad in terms of your approach to teams today?
I guess one big thing I learned back then, and when I think about it now, it was a very good learning, was exactly that a team, and he was in AFL. So a team is exactly that, a team. And a team is made up of individuals, and each individual is going to bring to that team something unique. But if you can't mould that team into something that works together in harmony, then it doesn't matter. So I guess my learnings from way back then were how important the team aspect and getting all of those different elements of the team. And in netball, we have teams of 12, getting it all working in sync at the one time. And then the team of 7 that goes on the court, getting that working in sync at the one time. And it might sound very easy, but it's a particularly hard thing to do. And it doesn't come along all that often. And when you see, the better teams in whatever sport it is, and when it is in sync, it's lovely. And you get those magical games. But when it's not quite in sync, something's not quite right, then, it's not as good. And looking at the World Cup this year in Cape Town and England, I was quite intrigued by England because they beat Australia in the rounds and did so very well. And their game was all in sync and it was very nice. When it got to the final, something wasn't quite right. And there was something missing, and their game wasn't where it should have been, and consequently Australia's was, and Australia won comfortably. So, yeah, the learnings would have been way back then, even, watching AFL as I did as a kid, was how important to link and to build and to gel all the different aspects of a team so that they work as one.
Jill, can I pick up on this idea of gelling, syncing? Sometimes people call it connection, because you've coached the national teams of Australia, Northern Ireland, Jamaica, Singapore, and Wales. Now, that's a pretty good data set to refer back to. So when it comes to getting in sync, gelling together, what do the best teams do differently?
I think, we look at the physical and we look at the psychological side of our game, and the teams you've mentioned and all the teams, when you look at them at the top, physically there's not much that separates them. They work with, some excellent sports science personnel in this day and age, and so they're well conditioned. Everything about them is good. So it comes down to that little, percentage of the psychological aspect. And some of the teams you've mentioned, it is exactly that where they fall down. And building respect, I think, is a big thing. And as I mentioned before about gelling all the different aspects. And if players don't have respect for each other and respect for the personnel around them, then it falls apart. And I won't mention the teams, but certainly I coached a very good team that could have gone on to really, really good things, but it was that little bit of psychological aspect that let them down, and the lack of respect for each other, and very much infighting within the group. And it's just that very thing that lets them down. And when push comes to shove and when the crunch comes, it needs to be all there. And I think at the moment, when you look at the Diamonds, they have it. So when they're absolutely under pressure, psychologically, they're strong and they get stronger and they band together, the 7 on court and those on the bench, and they're a very strong unit. They're all physically very capable, but it's that psychological edge where I think sets the Diamonds in Australia apart from the rest.
Is it possible to teach that? Can you coach that? Or is it just innate in a group? Is it the magic of the chemistry?
It's a bit of both. I think each player's born with a certain quality, an innate quality to be strong psychologically. You can certainly enhance it, I believe, in players. You can use all the tricks of the trade and our sports psychologists and all of those sorts of people to try and enhance it. But, in the heat of the battle, when they're out there in a World Cup and they're trying to win and beat the world, it comes back to the individual. And that's where I think it's what they're born with, that they'll fall back on. But, some have it, some don't. And it's not an easy thing to improve, but I think you can improve it. But I think, certain levels of strong psychological character are built into the person at birth.
I mean, Jill, it's fascinating to hear you talk about that. And I just wondered if you could speak a little bit to how you detect that, how you measure it. I mean, I think when you finished as the Australian coach, you had a winning rate of 94%, which is pretty phenomenal. But I'm sure, as you say, it's not just about winning. It's about other elements. How are you judging a team? How are you judging its progress? How are you measuring that? What are the signs and the signals that you're detecting that you can, measure improvement or change over time?
Well, when I had the group, it was the way they played, their adherence to everything that was asked of them, the quality of their skills, did it break down, and all the processes that we had in place around those skills. And if those were all in place, then often we were very successful, respecting the rules of our game and not making errors. And I think that plays a big part in the outcome. And again, I'll go back to the final of the World Cup, and you look at the Diamonds, and their unforced error rate was very low. And I think that when you look at teams, and before you get to the final outcome, if that unforced error rate is very low, then you're not coughing up the ball and giving it to the opposition to score, and you're scoring. So it's a respect again for each other. It's being able to, under extreme pressure, still go about your business and doing the simple things well over and over every time and executing them without error. And that's just the simple things of catching and passing and making the best decisions, throwing the right passes and all of those sorts of things. And, of course, scoring the goals. So there's many aspects to it. But we used to have a rule of excellence, and it was excellence in everything we did because it starts on the training track. And if it's not being put out there on the training track, you can't expect it to magically happen on the day of the event. So training was about excellence in everything we did, and that was on court and off court, and adherence to all the little things that we had to do on court and off court. And that little rule of excellence went a long way. And I guess with the group I had over the years, we expected to do well. We expected to have success. There was not a hope there. It was an expectation, because if we'd covered all our bases and we'd done all the work and we'd left no stone unturned, we're in a pretty good position to come out with success. So a lot of it starts on the training track and around excellence. And each player pushing each other and expecting that. And if someone's not pulling their weight, well, their teammates pull up on it and make them pull their weight. And I think over the years that I had the Diamonds, we pretty much did that quite well. Players would keep each other in check. And together, as I said, there was an expectation of success. And more often than not, we got it.
Jill, one of the things you've got a lot of experience as well is around starting with new teams. So you've started so many of those national teams we talked about, and there's club teams scattered through there as well. And I wanted to ask you, when you start with a new team and you're gathering them around and you're trying to get them to gel, is there anything that you do that helps them define their purpose or their why?
Well, I can use the analogy of the current team I'm looking after, the Cardiff Dragons. So they are a new team to me. They've been in the competition for a while. Their success rate has not been very good. They finished bottom of the ladder this year. So it was like starting afresh. They've recruited very well, so they have a reasonable team going into next year's competition. So it was sitting down with them at the very beginning and establishing exactly what it is we want and listing what it is we want and then how we're going to achieve it. Yeah, the ultimate is you want to win. At that level is about winning. But it's the how. How are you going to do it? And then it's what are you going to do to get it? And we sat there and we've come up with a list and that they must adhere to. And I think that's a very important aspect of it. And I guess every team that I've been associated with, it's starting from that very beginnings of establishing exactly what it is we want. But it's more about how we're going to do it. And I think that little word how is a very strong and powerful word. And I think a lot of coaches, they know what they want, but they don't know how they're going to do it and how they're going to get it. And it's also a collaboration between players and coaching staff and then all the other personnel around the group, because there's certainly an on-court team, but there's also an off-court team. And if they're not working in sync, it certainly doesn't work. So, the Dragons, we've sat down and we've come up with our little list. There isn't how, excuse me, and they're so far so good, but it's only in early days. So we'll see. We'll see as the competition goes along, if the how is working. We haven't put too much pressure on ourselves. Our goal is to win more matches than we don't. And in that way, if we can win more matches than we don't, then, we won't be on the bottom for 2024.
Oh, it's a lovely story. Would it be possible to hear a couple of the things that are on that list, or is it too top secret?
Well, it's about, it's nothing mind-blowing. So, one of it is let's take training. And we set a rule. So let's say we start training at 6 p.m. Well, people have to be there at 5:45. And that's just what it is. And being on time every time, being strapped. It sounds so silly and inane, but it's not. It's so important that when 6 o'clock comes, everyone is ready to go. They're not still putting shoes on, they're not strapping, but they're ready to go. And my bugbear as a coach is that for players that are late, and then they come up with every excuse under the sun, or they don't even turn up to training. And, there's always a different reason why. And you start to think, well, they're not really invested in this group. So, just those two little examples go a long way to forming a very cohesive group. And if they want to achieve, they will adhere to all of those little things, apart from the skills around the group, but all those little things that go to making the group successful.
So, Jill, you've worked as a coach developer as well for the International Netball Federation. Can you say what that experience and the others that you've had have taught you about the importance of values within a team?
Oh, yes. I think values, one of the biggest one is respect. And you hear coaches talk about respect and demanding respect. But I've always said to coaches, you can't demand respect, you have to earn it. And you earn it by the things you do and how you go about doing those things. And when you watch the better coaches around the world and the way they operate, and that's in all sports, they earn the respect of not only their players, but the support staff, the fans at the top level. And that for me is a biggie about values. And coming up with a series of values that encompasses what the group means and what fits for that group, and defining it is so very important. And I think when you look at the most successful teams in the world, and the diamonds at the moment for netball are exactly that. Their values, I don't know what they are specifically, but I can see a respect. I can see a respect from the players to each other. I can see a respect their players to coaches. And I like watching different coaches in action. And on match days, are the players engaged? Just that simple thing. Are they listening to what their coach is telling them? Are they looking at their coach, or are they looking around the stadium? And just that little simple thing tells you a lot. And if they're not, well, they're not respectful. They're not engaged. And when you look at a bench and you look at the coach who's addressing them, all eyes should be on that coach. All ears should be on what the coach is saying. And also the two-way communication that they have. And you don't necessarily have to hear what they're saying. Body language goes a long way to telling you that, yeah, it's all working well or it's not working well. And when you see some teams and some coaches that some of those values and respect are not there, the players are all over the place. They're not even engaged. They're looking, behind them. They're looking anywhere else but the coach. And then you know that is not going to be a successful team. So, yeah, respect is a big word. And as I said, coaches need to earn it. They can't demand it. They earn it by their actions.
So I think you were 15 when you started coaching, Jill, but you were also a captain. And so different roles, what do you look for in the captain? And what are the qualities that you need a captain to have, different to the coach?
Captains are so very important. Yeah, I thought I was a coach in my little team that I was playing in because we had no one else. And I happened that particular year to make a state team in Western Australia. So I thought I knew a bit. And I look back now and I think, wow, I knew nothing. And if only I knew then what I know now would have been so much better. But yeah, captains are so, so very important to a coach. And if you have a good captain, it makes life so much easier. Again, the word respect for each other. I think captains have to have honesty and integrity because of their conversations that coaches have with captains that are very personal about players, and you can't have a captain running off to the particular player they've been talking about and spilling the beans, so to speak. And if a team has a grumble or whatever, that the captain reports back to the coach what the team wants, not what the captain wants, but what the team wants. And the captain represents the team. And they can generate a positive environment. And I think good captains, yeah, they lead by example on court. They not necessarily need to be your best player, but they need to encapsulate all of that we spoke about excellence on the court and doing the things well that are asked of them. And then also creating a very positive environment off the court. And the things that captains need to do around media and all of those promotional things that, they just do them. And there's no whinging and whining about the time spent. They just do them because that's part of the role. And I guess I've been very lucky over the years to have some excellent captains who, yeah, had the honesty, they had the integrity, and they represented the team, and good players, good on the training track, even better, on match days. So captains, you just need to find the right ones, and then they make your life so much easier as a coach.
I've got this interesting quote from you, Jill. I might read it to you if that's okay, and then ask you the question. You say, you must renew those around you, as they are the ones who bring new ideas and new ways of doing the same thing to the table. They keep your mind open. And I was intrigued a little bit by it. And I thought I might ask you, who have been the key mentors for you through your career who have helped you achieve this?
I guess probably a name that everyone knows in netball is Joyce Brown. And throughout my national representation as a player, she was, a highlight, I guess. When I look back now at what I learnt off her, from her coaching to how I've framed my own coaching, a lot of it was, the values and everything that she had in place when I was under her as a player. She was a very forthright, a very forward-thinking person. She had some creative ideas, and, she set the excellence and the values that we wanted. So for me as a player, I guess, I've now put a lot of those into my coaching. And I had a mentor, a sort of a pseudo mentor, a basketball coach, and gentleman that was fairly high up in the ranks of basketball, and just knew him as a person, but knew him also as a basketball coach. And he was good to have outside of netball. And a lot of people think that you have to have mentors within your sport. Well, you don't, because every problem I had, and I'd go and sit down and have a chat, he'd already had it, solved it, and come out the other end. So, he was good because it was, in a different sport, but same issues cropped up. So I think between those two, I learned a great deal about coaching. Also, I like watching sport. I'll watch anything. So they're not really mentors, but just watching coaches in action. And as I said, you don't necessarily have to hear so much what they say. It's how they do it. And you watch them, because I am very big on body language and how players, look at coaches and how they engage with coaches and how they act on what coaches say. And some of the sports, and you watch coaches, and watching, as I am in Wales, in the UK at the moment, you see a lot of football, or soccer as we call it, and some of their coaches, and they have the ability to walk up and down a sideline. So they get very carried away, very angry at times and very carried away. It's quite interesting. And the different sports and how the different coaches act, and within the realms of their sport. Basketball is another one that it seems to be that coaches need to stand up and walk up and down and look fierce and look angry. And that's just the way it is in that particular sport. And then you come to AFL, and I always think about AFL and the first break that they come to quarter time. They're still out there on the field. And you've got 18 players surrounded the coach. And I look not at the front line of the players, I look at the back line of the players. And what are they? They're at the back. Are they listening to the coach? Are they watching him? Are they looking at the whiteboard that he's writing stuff on? Yeah, it's quite fascinating. And I know AFL now, and they're very diverse, and they're very good in the way they come up with different things, and how now I went to one of the particular club's training, and the coach really didn't do anything except stand in the middle of the oval, just watching everything around him, and had all of his various assistants doing their bit with the players in the respective areas. And this coach was just looking at it all and taking it all in, and just seeing what the players were doing. And that was quite fascinating. Just stood in the middle of the oval. And I thought, that would be nice, wouldn't it? But, so for me, I do watch a lot of sport and how coaches react and what they do. And as I said, not necessarily what they say, but sometimes when you hear what they say and you think, well, what did they say? They say a whole lot of nothing. So, it's just over the years, just gaining those experiences as you go. But for me, Joyce in netball, and my basketball mentor. Very, very valuable.
There you go, Paul. You've got to find a way to get body language into the podcast because that's what you're missing.
I'm sitting up more straight here at the minute, making sure that I'm making eye contact with you, Jill. I don't want to get in any trouble.
So Joyce Brown did say a couple of things to you, and you've quoted her on it. Surround yourself with successful people. Don't forget to take time out for yourself every day. Can you just reflect on that and how you've tried to get that life balance for yourself right as you've matured as a leader, Jill?
Yes, I can remember when I first was awarded the national job in 95, and I had a little office all by myself, and because I was in Canberra and our main office, Netball Australia main office at that time was in Sydney. And I felt that every second of that day while I was in my office, I had to be there in the office, and I couldn't go out because the phone might ring. And it was, so I couldn't go out for lunch or I couldn't go out for a walk and I just thought I had to be sitting there in case the phone might ring, because if somebody rang me and I wasn't there, they would think I wasn't doing my job. And then over time, I learned that, no, in a day, I need to take time out for myself. And I can always remember Joyce saying exactly that. Coaching at the top is a lonely job, and you can't give everything. You can't give 24/7 attention to it because you'll burn out or break down. So in every 24 hours, you need time away. And my time away used to be I'd go for a lunchtime walk if the weather permitted. And, so in the early sort of times of my coaching, I just sat by that phone. It never rang, of course, so I could have gone for my walk. But, it was just that adherence and learning that, you don't have to be sitting at a desk to be doing your job, particularly in coaching. And then her other bit of advice was, surround yourself by successful people, meaning that be very mindful about who you put in around you and about your assistant coaches, your managers, your sports science personnel. Be very mindful of what they bring. Yes, they need to be like-minded as I was, but they also needed the ability to keep my mind open to different ways and to challenge me, not in a dreadful way, but challenge me to make sure that I was, had an open mind and could come up with different things as we went along. And I thought, over the years, I did have some very, very good people around me. And they also need to have that growth mindset that, they learn, they're open to new ideas. It's not a closed book. We're always learning. You're always learning as a coach and bringing new ideas to the group and thinking at this high performance level and what it takes and what they can bring to the group. So, yes, those two little quotes from Joyce when I first started really have resonated with me and stayed with me all through my coaching.
I think it's good advice for anybody who's in a leadership role to go for a walk at lunchtime. I think it's a very important way. A few deep breaths and some fresh air can always help build perspective. But I've got another quote. We've got a few little quotes here towards the end of the interview, but this one was a recent one. You said the fun part of a coach is being able to add your creative flair to the program. Now, I hear many coaches talk about the importance of fun when it comes to learning. But I wanted to ask you more broadly how you would describe a good team culture, because I'm interested to hear whether or not fun makes it onto the list.
Well, it's either fun or stroke enjoyment. It must be there. And I think it doesn't matter at whatever level you are operating at as a coach or as a player, there's got to be enjoyment in it. And if you're not enjoying it, get out, because it becomes an absolute chore. And if it becomes a chore and it's horrible, then it has an effect on you, not only your personality, it has an effect on your health. So fun stroke enjoyment must be in that list of cultures that belong to your team. And there's got to be a purpose and values around it I think one of the things when we talk about cultures is behaviours, and I think cultures represent behaviours. And when, teams sit down, and they often sit down and have a culture day, and they come up with all their cultures for the ensuing year, there's got to be a list of consequences attached to those cultures. So when you have behaviours and they come up with the do's and the don'ts for the group, alongside that don'ts, there's got to be consequences. And I think for many teams, they forget the consequences. So, they've got a whole bunch of words down on a bit of paper, but sometimes those words aren't adhered to. And under the behaviours and under the don'ts column, things happen, but players are never pulled up on it. So there's no learning. I think their attitude has got to be in there as well, and their actions from the attitude. What are their actions? The systems and the structures that go around your group, and every group will be different, and the discipline attached to it. And the discipline around not only the rules of your competition and the rules of the game, but the discipline about being an elite coach, being an elite player, and what it means, and the discipline to do everything. And it's often self-led, and it's not waiting for somebody to tell you to do something. It's a simple thing like not waiting for somebody to tell you to pick up your strapping tape. Pick it up, put it in the bin. So things like that. So cultures are behaviours, I think. And so sitting down and coming up with them, but they've got to represent your group and the personnel and the different characters and the different, personalities that you have in your group. And I think that's very important. So, you go through those at the beginning of your campaign, and they stay with you right throughout your campaign.
Jill, can you say a little bit more about that learning point there? Because I know you've spoken about teams needing the respect and the adherence and the discipline. You've also said that coaches need to stay up to date, make sure they keep developing. But how do teams keep learning at a fast enough rate just to be able to keep a pace and react and improve? What are your tricks there?
Well, they learn off you, the coach, I think, and if they don't, well, then you don't really want them. You don't want a player that is a closed book. And I've used the word growth mindset a lot. And, players need to keep an open mind. And I also spoke about doing the simple things well. But sometimes, there's a better way. There's a better way of doing the same thing. And so as a coach, we go off to whatever. We go off to seminars. We listen to podcasts. We chat with other coaches. We read whatever we can find our information from, and we learn. And the game is developing. Our sports science personnel are just getting better and better. Our players are fitter, and they're more attuned to physically being able to get out there and perform at their best than when I was playing. We were left to our own devices. So the coach goes out there and learns. You never stop learning, and then imparts that onto the players. But the players need to embrace it. And they can't be closed shop. They can't think, no, I've always done it this way. It's always worked for me this way. I'm always going to do it this way. So it's this growth mindset that they must have, an open mind to take on board any new things, give them a go. They might not work. If they don't work, don't use them. If they do, well, then you've learned something new. So this is an ongoing process. It never stops. I think as coaches, we're always looking at trying to find new ways of doing the same thing, but doing it better.
Jill, maybe just one final question, if I could. You've mentioned purpose a few times in this interview. I won't say your age, that's impolite, but you're still coaching. You've been coaching. But if we go back to 15, it's probably over 50 years that you've been coaching.
Yes.
And I know that you're not showing any sign of slowing down soon, but what's the purpose that coaching helps meet for you in life?
Well, I guess this current gig that I've got, which came out of the blue, I must say, because most of my coaching up until taking on the Cardiff Dragons was coach education around, taking courses about being a mentor to coaches and that sort of thing. And then just by pure chance and friends that are in netball, this coaching gig came up. Yes, it's in Wales. It's a long way from home. And I had to sit down and think, well, do I need this at my age? Do I need to be taking on all of this stress and so on and so forth? And then I thought, well, it's a challenge. And I look at it as a challenge for me that I haven't really been in charge of a team at this level for a while. And it was sort of a bit of a reassurance that I can still do it, that I have, all of the experience now that I've gathered over the many years, and I can put it into practice, and I'm, not washed up. And I still have something to offer. So far it's been very enjoyable, very pleasurable. But as I said previously, we're into pre-season. That's the easy part. And the difficulty will come when we start playing and what happens around those matches. But, I guess, it was just a reassurance that, yes, I can still coach. I have a lot of experience to impart, and I can still operate at that level in a successful manner.
Well, Jill, thank you so much for your time today. And I wish you all the best for the season ahead. You're over there in one of the most proud sporting nations in the world. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people looking on with interest to see how the Dragons go. But I appreciate your time and thank you for being so forthright and open with us today.
Okay, thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.
You're listening to the Great Coaches Podcast.
So, Eric, Jill was fantastic. So many interesting ideas there about cohesion, being in sync, psychological strength. What was something that stood out for you?
Well, I think when you react to these things, it probably says something about you as much as it does about what they said. But I personally resonated a lot with Jill's comment about adherence to excellence. I mean, I do think that commitment to be unabashedly excellent, to focus on what excellence means and to drive the value towards that, I think is something that it's a brave thing to commit to. And I think people rally around that feeling of quality, that feeling of being the best. So I personally found that as a very nice anchor point into the conversation. And clearly it's worked for Jill over many, many decades.
Well, it's interesting because some of the other people we've interviewed over the years talk about not having a set of rules or consequences because then you have to enforce them. And they talk instead of having a list of principles. But Jill seemed to think that this was the way to resurrect a culture and strengthen it.
Yeah, see, so for me, when she started talking about the how, respect, connection, discipline, that's all in service of something. And that thing is excellence, what the team wants to achieve. So I think, we spend a lot of time thinking about the how do we build thriving teams? I think all of those are really important, but they are in service of something. And I think that, that sense of purpose, being clear on that purpose, having that linked up front, I think is a great motivator for teams. Certainly I've seen it that way. If the purpose isn't clear and if the senior leaders don't have an aligned view of that, then I think people don't quite know which way to look. They're looking over their shoulders or they're a little unclear. They don't know if they're, doing the right thing. So I think the kind of what and then the how I thought was a nice sort of articulation of the key things in building a team culture.
Also like that interesting idea she had there at the end around when you asked her about learning and she said, well, it comes back from the leader. And I wondered how you reflect on that in your role at the university.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a university, we're always thinking about learning. And I have in my mind an action learning framework by Cole, which talks about how do we build action and reflection as a loop. So I think what's the nice thing about what Jill was talking about, and I think is good in sport, is that you've got, a game, you can reflect on the behaviors around that game, and then you can go again. And I think that's a very effective loop for learning. Not all walks of life, not all organizations have such a structured, existence. And so the challenge, I think, for all of us in leadership and in teams is to work out, well, what's our version of that? Is it the weekly meeting? Is it the quarterly cadence? Is it some deliverable of a report? Like, what are the moments that we're going to put a line under and step away for a moment and reflect and say, what did we learn from that? And I think too often we just keep going on and we never have those moments of reflection. And without that, we don't learn.
And there's this idea in there too, isn't there, around body language. And I think using your body language to aid in learning, or at least facilitate learning, is a very powerful idea. And it was interesting that she was so forthright and focused on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I was making a bit of a joke there about the podcast and how you're going to incorporate body language. But I'm actually working on a paper on body language at the moment, Paul. It's not yet published. I'll let you know when it is. But one of the key things that we make about body language is that it allows you to read emotions and feelings, because so much of what we think about in the world of organizations is about rational ideas and logic and data. And that's only half the story. The other half of it is, how do people feel about the data? How are they reacting to that? Just this week, someone was telling me about how they've really tuned themselves to reading the room, thinking about how people are responding to various ideas and concepts. So that, when I was hearing Jill talk about the team and the different players on that team and how they gel together, that's as much about what is said as it is observing how people are responding to what is said. And I think it's that body language, that emotional, that feeling response that I think you really clue in by looking at how people respond, react, behave. And it's not all the same. People have different twitches and they have different ways of doing their eye contact. So it does require a little bit of time to observe and read that room.
Well, look, I can tell you, I worked as an expat for 16 years, and in a lot of those countries, English was not the main language. And so you rely on body language. You rely on reading people's emotional response and reaction in a way to communicate. And I think you're right. Sometimes we get lazy and perhaps we don't tune into that as much as we should.
Yeah, as I said, there's more languages than English, right? It's not just English versus Japanese. There's also body language as a language, and there's all kinds of ways in which I think people are sending out signals and giving you signs that you pick up on, but some of it isn't always conscious. But think about the life we all led during COVID, where we no longer were able to sit around in a room with people or get into a workshop. All the stuff that we weren't able to pick up, we suddenly had to infer through a video conference, and I think we can all agree that was pretty hard work.
It definitely was. I think that's probably a good place for us to wrap it up for this interview with Jill. Eric, thank you for coming along and joining us, and I look forward to doing it all again next week.
Thanks, Paul. It should be fun.